Picture this. Your power grid fails tomorrow, permanently. Your grocery stores close for 4 months. Your heating system goes silent. Your water stops flowing. How long would you last? For you, this is a nightmare scenario. For a medieval farmer, this was simply called winter. We romanticize the past with images of cozy cottages and crackling hearths. But winter in medieval Europe wasn't charming. It was a merciless executioner that claimed entire families who made a single miscalculation. While you complain about heating bills, they calculated grain stores down to the last handful, knowing that underestimating by even 10% meant watching their children starve before spring's first shoots. These weren't primitive people stumbling through dark ages. They were the ultimate survivalists, forced by brutal necessity to master what we've completely forgotten: closed-loop systems where nothing could be wasted. Everything had multiple purposes, and survival depended on planning months ahead with mathematical precision. Today, we live in an illusion of abundance, insulated by supply chains we don't understand and energy systems we take for granted. We've traded away the hard-won wisdom of generations, knowledge that meant the difference between life and death when the cold winds began to blow. But here's the unsettling truth. Winter hasn't changed. Only we have. And in abandoning these ancient survival systems, we've made ourselves more vulnerable than the medieval farmers we pity. The question isn't if their world was harsh, it's if we could survive in it. October was Judgment Day, not in churches, but in barns and granaries where a medieval farmer stood surrounded by the fruits of an entire year's labor, making calculations that would determine whether his family lived or died. Imagine the psychological weight. Every sack of grain, every preserved ham, every bundle of firewood had to be mathematically perfect. Too little, and February would bring the slow agony of starvation. Too much consumption early, and March would find empty larders, with spring still weeks away. There was no margin for error, no safety net, no grocery store to bail you out. This wasn't just planning, it was prophecy. Medieval farmers had to predict exactly how many calories their family would burn during months of bitter cold, account for illness that might increase food need, calculate fuel consumption down to the last log. They lived by what we've forgotten, the sacred mathematics of survival. Contrast this with our just-in-time delusion. We've built a world where grocery stores stock 3 days of food, where supply chains stretch across oceans, where most people couldn't feed themselves for a week without external system. The pandemic gave us a glimpse. Empty shelves after just days of disruption. Medieval farmers would have laughed at our panic buying, then wept at our helplessness. Their autumn preparations weren't just practical, they were spiritual covenants with future survival. Every preserved apple, every smoked fish, every carefully stored seed was a prayer answered through work, a promise kept to the family they might never see again if they miscalculated. We call this primitive, they called it staying alive. Your house is a parasite. Strip away the power grid, the gas lines, the water system, and it becomes a hollow shell that will kill you faster than sleeping outdoors. Medieval homes were the opposite. They were living organisms designed to keep you alive without a single external input. Walk into a medieval farmhouse, and you're entering a masterpiece of survival engineering that makes modern, smart
smart homes look like death traps. The central hearth wasn't just a fireplace. It was the beating heart of a closed-loop life support system. That single fire cooked food, provided light, heated the home, and created the updraft that ventilated the entire structure. One flame, four critical survival functions. But the genius went deeper. Those thick stone or timber walls weren't just barriers. They were massive thermal batteries, absorbing heat during the day and radiating it back through the night. The animals weren't kept in separate barns. They lived directly below the family, their body heat rising through floorboards, their breath adding humidity to prevent deadly dry air. Their presence provided security and early warning systems. Descend to the root cellar and discover medieval climate control, earth-sheltered chambers that maintained perfect temperatures year-round without electricity. 40 degrees in summer, 40 degrees in winter, ideal for preserving the food that meant survival. This was thermal community, humans, animals, and architecture functioning as one organism. Your grandmother's warmth helped heat the cow. The cow's warmth helped heat your children, and the house itself breathed and regulated like a living thing. Compare this to your modern home, a fragile box dependent on distant power plants, vulnerable to supply chain disruptions, requiring constant external energy to remain habitable. We've traded integrated survival systems for convenient vulnerability. The medieval farmer didn't live in his house lived with him, a symbiotic partner in the daily struggle against death. When winter came, the architecture itself fought for his survival.
We throw away 40% of our food. Medieval farmers would have executed you for such criminal waste. Nothing, absolutely nothing, was discarded in a medieval farmstead because waste meant death. Follow a single grain of wheat through their system and witness genius that makes our sustainable practices look like ecological vandalism. That wheat became flour for bread, but the story was just beginning. The bran couldn't feed humans, so it fed the pig. The pigs converted that waste into meat, fat, and leather. But even their excrement became gold, fertilizing next year's wheat field. When the pig was slaughtered, its bones became tools, needles, and handles. Its fat became candles for light and soap for washing. Its blood became sausage casings and pudding. Even failure became opportunity. Grain that spoiled couldn't make bread, but it could ferment into ale, providing calories and safe drinking water when wells froze solid. Stale bread became animal feed or soup thickener. Vegetable scraps fed chickens that laid eggs and provided meat. Chicken waste fertilized gardens that grew more vegetables. This wasn't recycling. This was thinking in circles instead of lines. Every output became an input somewhere else. Every waste stream became a resource stream. Medieval farmers were forced to design closed loops because linear thinking meant linear death. Contrast this with our insane linear consumption. We grow food using fossil fuels, transport it thousands of miles, consume a fraction, then dump the rest in landfills where it rots and produces methane. We've created a system so wasteful it would have horrified medieval farmers as both economically suicidal and morally obscene. As supply chains fracture and resources become scarce, we're rediscovering what they never forgot. In a finite world, thinking in circles isn't just smart, it's survival. You eat meat 3 times a day without thinking. Medieval farmers ate it 3 times a year and treasured every morsel like medicine. November was Judgment Month, the brutal ritual when life or death mathematics determined which animals lived until spring and which died to feed the family through winter's darkness. Old oxen, past their working prime, slaughtered first. Young breeding females,
protected at all costs. Sick pigs that might not survive the cold, better in the smokehouse than dead in the barn. These weren't farmers. They were protein accountants, calculating survival with surgical precision. Watch a medieval butchering and witness reverence we've forgotten. Every scrap became sacred. Muscle became salt-cured ham that lasted months. Fat rendered into cooking oil and candles. Bones boiled from marrow and soup. Blood mixed into puddings for iron-rich calories. Even intestines became sausage casing. The animal died once, but fed the family 100 times. Salt was worth more than silver because it transformed death into life, preserving meat that would otherwise rot in days. Smokehouses became temples where protein was transformed into shelf-stable survival rations. Fat wasn't avoided, it was hoarded as concentrated calories and essential light source. We've flipped the script entirely. Modern factory farming creates protein abundance so cheap we throw it away without guilt. We've shifted from protein as precious medicine to protein as disposable commodity. This psychological transformation from gratitude to entitlement has made us vulnerable in ways medieval farmers would recognize as suicidal. When scarcity returns, and history suggests it always does, will we remember how to treat protein as the life-giving treasure it truly is?
You flip a switch and banish darkness without thought. Medieval families calculated every flame like their lives depended on it, because they did. Light wasn't free. It was liquid currency burning away precious resources. A single tallow candle consumed hours of labor, slaughtering animals, rendering fat, making wicks from rushes. That flickering flame represented calories that could have fed the family, fuel that could have heated the home, materials that could have served a dozen other survival needs. This scarcity created what we've lost, the darkness economy. Families couldn't afford individual light sources, so they gathered around the central hearth like moths drawn to the only flame that mattered. Grandmothers mended clothes, while fathers carved tools, and children learned skills, not by choice, but by economic necessity that accidentally created community. When darkness fell, medieval families didn't fight it. They surrendered to natural rhythms we've declared war against. Early sleep wasn't laziness. It was energy conservation. Shared warmth under piled furs wasn't intimacy. It was thermal efficiency. Storytelling wasn't entertainment. It was knowledge transfer in a world where forgetting meant dying. Contrast this with our energy blindness. We flood our homes with artificial light, heat individual rooms we're not using, stay awake fighting natural circadian rhythm. We've gained convenience, but lost something profound, the forced togetherness that created resilient communities and the natural rhythms that conserved precious energy. Our ancestors lived like pack animals because survival demanded it. We live like isolated individuals because abundance allows it. But when that abundance falters, will our fractured families and energy-dependent lifestyles prove to be luxuries we couldn't afford to develop? The darkness is coming back. The question is whether we'll face it together or alone.
Your smartphone contains the knowledge of human civilization. Your hands can barely change a light bulb. Medieval farmers carried libraries in their muscles and encyclopedias in their instincts. Every medieval farmer was a Renaissance polymath by survival necessity. Weather reading wasn't a hobby. It was prophecy that determined when to plant, harvest, and slaughter. Cloud formations, wind patterns, animal behavior, plant responses. They read nature like you read notifications, except their literacy meant life or death. Food preservation was biochemistry without laboratory
laboratories. They understood fermentation, salt curing, smoking, and drying with molecular precision earned through generations of trial and fatal error. Textile production meant breeding sheep, shearing wool, spinning thread, weaving cloth, and sewing garments. A complete supply chain embodied in individual competence. Basic medicine, tool repair, fire management, construction, veterinary care. Each farmer was a walking university of practical knowledge. If one skill failed, 10 others compensated. Redundancy wasn't inefficiency, it was anti-fragility built into human capability. Their children learned through apprenticeship of consequence, not consumption of content. 5-year-olds tended animals, 8-year-olds managed fires, 12-year-olds performed surgery on livestock. Every skill was earned through repetition until competence became instinct. We've achieved the opposite, hyper-specialization that creates hyper-vulnerability. We know more, but can do less. We have infinite access to information, but finite practical capability. The helplessness paradox. Medieval farmers who couldn't read were more literate in survival than PhD holders who can't grow food, preserve meat, or repair tools. When systems fail, and they always do, knowledge without capability is just sophisticated ignorance. Medieval farmers didn't need to Google how to survive winter. They were living search engines, programmed by experience, not algorithms. The question isn't whether you know enough, it's whether your hands remember what your ancestors' hands knew by heart.
Rugged individualism is a modern luxury that medieval farmers couldn't afford. They understood a truth we've forgotten. In a world of scarcity, independence is just another word for death. Medieval communities weren't quaint social clubs. They were mutual aid societies, engineered by necessity. When Johann's barn burned, the entire village appeared with timber, tools, and labor. Not from kindness, but from calculated self-interest. Next month, it might be their barn burning. Barn raising wasn't charity. It was insurance paid in sweat and returned in kind. Shared harvests meant survival. One family couldn't bring in grain fast enough before storms hit, but 20 families working together could harvest the entire valley in days. Tool sharing wasn't neighborly, it was economic efficiency. Why should every farmer own a plow when one could serve 10 families? Skill sharing was knowledge insurance. The village blacksmith taught others his trade, because if he died, the community's tools died with him. These relationships weren't friendships, they were life insurance policies written in social capital. Every favor was an investment, every shared meal a down payment on future survival. Medieval festivals, markets, and religious gatherings weren't entertainment, they were survival networking events where alliances were forged and mutual aid agreements renewed. Contrast this with modern individualistic isolation. We've traded interdependence for autonomy, community resilience for personal convenience. Our suburban fortresses create the illusion of self-sufficiency while making us completely dependent on systems we don't control and neighbors we don't know. When disaster strikes, and it always does, medieval communities activated like immune systems, every member mobilizing to protect the whole. Modern communities collapse because we've forgotten how to need each other strategically. The path forward isn't abandoning autonomy, but rebuilding interdependence, creating networks of mutual aid that make us stronger together while keeping us capable apart. Medieval farmers mastered this balance. The question is whether we can relearn it before we need it. Physical preparation meant nothing without psychological armor. Medieval farmers understood what modern therapy is rediscovering. Survival is as much mental as material, and the mind can be trained like any other tool. 4 months of darkness, isolation, and scarcity would break most modern minds within weeks. Medieval families endured it annually because they built psychological fortresses stronger than their stone wall. Storytelling wasn't entertainment, it was mental conditioning, passing down not just information, but emotional frameworks for surviving hardship. Each tale of ancestors who endured worse winters became proof that this winter too could be survived. Religious practices provided psychological scaffolding when material supports crumbled. Prayer wasn't superstition, it was structured meditation that reduced anxiety and created routine in chaos. Seasonal rituals marked progress through the dark months, creating psychological waypoints that made endless winter feel finite and manageable. Where we expect comfort as a right, they accepted hardship as reality. This wasn't resignation, it was strategic mental conditioning. By expecting difficulty, they were psychologically prepared when it arrived. We expect ease and break when reality intrudes. Medieval farmers possessed something we've traded away: intimate knowledge of local ecosystems that created confidence. They knew which plants indicated spring's approach, which weather patterns meant harsh storms, which animal behaviors predicted harsh winters. This knowledge was psychological security. They understood their world and could predict its rhythms. Modern dependence on global systems we don't understand creates chronic anxiety. We are fed by farms we've never seen, powered by energy sources we can't explain, connected to supply chains beyond our comprehension. Medieval farmers lived in a smaller world they actually understood. Winter crafts weren't hobbies, they were hope made tangible. Carving tools for spring planting, mending equipment for next year's harvest, planning improvements for summer building. Each project was a psychological bridge to better times ahead. They didn't just survive winter physically, they conquered it mentally, turning months of potential despair into seasons of preparation, reflection, and renewal.
This isn't a romantic call to abandon modern life and return to medieval hardship. It's a wake-up call to question the assumptions that make us vulnerable. Medieval farmers weren't superior humans. They were ordinary people forced by necessity to master principles we've forgotten. Closed-loop thinking that wastes nothing. Skill diversity that creates resilience. Community interdependence that multiplies strength. Seasonal rhythms that conserve energy, and preparation mindsets that anticipate problems before they become crises. Here's the uncomfortable audit. If your power grid failed tomorrow, your grocery stores closed, and your heating system died, how long would you actually survive? Not your neighbors, not society, you. Medieval farmers could answer that question with mathematical precision. Can you? The path forward isn't backward. It's integrating ancient wisdom with modern tools. Learn food preservation while keeping your refrigerator. Build community networks while maintaining your independence. Develop practical skills while using modern information. Master your local ecosystem while staying globally connected. Think in closed loops while leveraging efficient systems. Medieval farmers had no choice. Adapt or die. We still have choices, but the window is closing. Climate change, supply chain fragility, energy instability, and social isolation are forcing the same adaptations they mastered centuries ago. The question was never whether you could survive a medieval winter. The question is whether you're building systems that could survive any winter, the winters of the future that may require ancient wisdom applied with modern intelligence. Winter is coming. It always is. The only choice is whether you'll face it with conscious resilience or unconscious vulnerability. Medieval farmers chose survival. What will you choose?